Boing, boing. Oh shit, Kha'Zix. Fucking backflip. Boing, boing. This fucking dude, man. The montage player. Welcome to the ultimate guide for Kha'Zix in Season 14. If you don't know who I am, my name is Tinjus. I'm a former Challenger Kha'Zix main, and I've played Kha'Zix since he was released in 2012. I've consistently reached into Master with him every season, and have accumulated over 4 million Mastery points on the champion. This guide is going to teach you absolutely everything that you need to know in order to use Kha'Zix effectively. We'll be covering all necessary topics ranging from runes, item choice, evolutions, abilities and mechanics, as well as all of the macro-oriented information like jungling and fundamentals. Kha'Zix is a very diverse champion, and through his evolutions and builds is able to adapt to many different game states. This guide will emphasize flexibility and help you consume and adapt to every situation with the champ. So, why play Kha'Zix? He's a champ that excels at assassinating and punishing mistakes that the enemy makes. In my eyes, he is the perfect assassin, with good mobility, invisibility, huge amounts of burst damage, and great utility. Kha'Zix's kit is extremely versatile, which means he's rarely ever weak, as he's able to adapt to any game state with his builds and evolutions. On top of that, he's an excellent solo carry champion who can dismantle an entire team by himself when given the chance. If you're looking for a versatile, high damage assassin that can put the team on their back while also being able to adapt to different game states, Kha'Zix is the perfect champion for you. I've played this champion for over 11 years now, and he still hasn't got boring. He's almost always a fun as hell champ to play, and over the years I've accumulated a huge amount of experience with the champ. It would be my pleasure to pass down my experience to you and teach you what this champion is all about. That being said, let's get started. Kha'Zix's passive is Unseen Threat. When not being seen, or when casting his ultimate, Kha'Zix will gain Unseen Threat, which will make his next basic attack deal extra damage and slow enemies. Your passive makes up a very good chunk of your damage in fights, and without it, you won't be killing anyone. An important aspect of playing Kha'Zix is refreshing this passive. Look for opportunities to refresh this ability as much as possible in fights. Kha'Zix's Q is Taste Their Fear. Using it on a target will deal physical damage to them. Kha'Zix has a unique mechanic called Isolation, which will let him deal bonus damage with his Q to people that are separated from their allies. The damage bonus on isolated enemies is enormous, and it's Kha'Zix's main strength. You want to make sure you're prioritizing isolated enemies in fights to deal massive damage to them. Kha'Zix's W is Void Spike, which shoots out a projectile in a line, dealing damage in a small area upon hitting an enemy. This ability will also heal Kha'Zix if he is inside the explosion that the spike causes. Kha'Zix's E is Leap. Kha'Zix will jump towards a direction and deal a small amount of area effect damage upon landing. Though it's a simple ability, it has a long cooldown, and a Kha'Zix without his Leap is a very susceptible one. Make sure to use this ability sparingly. Kha'Zix's R is Void Assault. He enters stealth for 1.25 seconds, gains move speed, and refreshes his Unseen Threat passive upon using it. Kha'Zix also gains an evolution point whenever he levels up this ability, which allows him to evolve one of his basic abilities, each causing different effects, which we'll touch on in a second. The key to a good Kha'Zix is the usage of their Void Assault in tandem with his other abilities, so get used to moving, dodging, and tricking your enemies with the invisibility. For skill order, simply max Q, W, then E, and put a point into R at levels 6, 11, and 16. Evolutions are essential upgrades to Kha'Zix's abilities, and directly affect the way Kha'Zix is played throughout the game. The beauty of Kha'Zix is that these evolutions allow him to adapt to any scenario, so let's go over each of them individually. Evolved Q, Reaper Claws, increases the range of Kha'Zix's basic attacks and Taste Their Fear, and it also reduces the cooldown of the ability whenever it is used against an isolated enemy. Q Evolve provides the maximum DPS possible, and it enables faster clear speeds, neutral objective taking, and unmatched 1v1 potential. Its purpose is to enable Kha'Zix to gain a lead in the early game through higher overall damage output and snowball into the mid game. Q Evolve is often the first evolution taken at level 6 because of its ability to create leads, and its value as an evolution generally falls off later on compared to the other evolutions. However, this doesn't mean it's bad later on in any way. By all means, if you feel you need more DPS, you can also evolve it at level 11 or 16. Evolved W, Spike Racks, adds a 40% slow to the ability and 75% when isolated. It also increases the number of spikes to 3 and lets Kha'Zix shoot them in a cone. W Evolve has two purposes. 1. To engage and disengage for your team with the massive slow, and 2. To poke the enemy from afar with decent damage. It's considered the more supportive evolution that helps Kha'Zix enable his team if the current game state deems it too hard to assassinate enemies by himself. This evolution is rarely taken at level 6 due to others being more powerful. Instead, you want to either run it at level 11 or 16 in order to transition Kha'Zix into a reliable, team-oriented playstyle. The Area of Effect Slow is an incredible tool to help create opportunities for your team and yourself in mid to late game teamfights. Evolved E, Wings, increases the range of your leap and resets the cooldown upon killing an enemy. E-Evolve is generally considered the playmaking hypercarry evolution that allows Kha'Zix to pick off out of position enemies and get out safely, or to kill multiple enemies in a single fight with the reset mechanic. E-Evolve gives you an escape mechanism when going in for risky assassinations, and because of this, is great for assassin type builds. E-Evolve is generally taken at either level 11 or 16. This transitions Kha'Zix into a strong assassin type playstyle mid-game, where he can make picks and create opportunities using the lead that you have gained from evolving Q or R early game. Evolved R, Adaptive Cloaking, increases the number of Void Assault casts to 3, and increases the duration of the invisibility to 2 seconds. R Evolve is an extremely powerful and also low risk evolution that opens up an immense amount of opportunities for Kha'Zix. These include better ganks, better extended fighting, better survivability in fights, better outplay potential. The fact is that this evolution opens up so many opportunities that wouldn't be possible without the increased invisibility. It's arguably the strongest evolution in the game for Kha'Zix, and it lets you catch enemies off guard since you can engage from the fog of war over very long distances. This is probably the most versatile evolution as well, as it's completely fine to take at any time. In most cases though, it's taken at level 6 or 11, which enables Kha'Zix to pull off fantastic ganks and be a massive threat in small skirmishes. So the ultimate question is, how do we decide what to evolve each game? So I feel the need to say that a lot of evolution orders are playstyle dependent. There are many top Kha'Zix players around the world that each run different evolutions and builds, yet they all find success on the champ. This just goes to show the brilliance of Kha'Zix's design, and it's going to be the same for you guys. That being said, there are definitely clear benefits of taking certain evolutions, so let me explain. I'm going to list a few of the main evolution orders that enable certain playstyles. The recommended paths are the ones most commonly used in the meta, whilst the others are mainly just to encourage you to experiment a bit. Evolve Q usually at level 6 if you need more DPS to fight enemies more easily. This extra DPS will let you take neutral objectives and camps faster, while also letting you kill faster. Evolve W at level 11 or 16 to support your team. This is a good choice if you're behind, you can't assassinate, or already have another main carry on your team. In games where you can't contribute as much, this will give your team a chance to shine. Evolve E at either level 11 or 16 if you're feeling strong and can assassinate enemies easily. This evolution loses a lot of value if you aren't able to successfully kill targets, and it's usually only useful with a lead, so make sure to keep this in mind when you're considering evolving it. Evolve R at level 6, 11 or 16 if you want better ganks and pick potential. The extended invisibility will let you snowball games with high pressure, and it's great for staying alive in fights. Though this is a really versatile evolution, just keep in mind that you might need the other evolutions to be more useful instead of this. On paper, Kha'Zix's mechanics are very simple, but in order to play the champ properly, you'll need to be mastering the most basic of mechanics. Let's start with the most basic thing every Kha'Zix player should be doing: taste their fear mid-air. It's an absolutely essential mechanic required to play Kha'Zix. In the middle of your leap, use Q while you're in the air. The benefit of this is that the channel time of Q will be used in the air, meaning you don't have to cast it on the ground. This saves huge amounts of time when executing leap combos. When engaging on an enemy, this is often followed up with your passive auto attack and W afterwards. But what if we don't want to use leap? There's going to be a huge amount of situations where we don't want to use our leap. In these situations, our initial burst combo is auto attack, Q, W. Auto attack has the smallest range, so we lead with that and apply the slow as well. Q is used second, and then we W last because if the enemy flashes or gets out of range, then we still have W to hit them from afar. This is particularly good if someone face checks you, or if you can close in on an enemy without leaping. Something to really keep in mind though, is that if you're worried too much about losing isolation mid-combo, or don't need to worry about the enemy moving too much, then using Q first is most ideal, since you're getting your biggest damage source off first, and it starts the cooldown earlier for maximum damage output. A small thing, but definitely something to take note of. If someone is jumping onto you, then ideally we prioritize using the W first to get the heal off, especially when we're low health. These sequences are the foundation of pretty much every Kha'Zix engage type, and you need to be able to do these consistently. Now moving on, you might notice that we haven't even used R with these combos. That's because the next mechanic is refreshing your passive, Unseen Threat. Your passive makes up a huge chunk of your damage in fights, and good Kha'Zix players will always reset it where possible to maximize damage. There's two ways to refresh Unseen Threat. One is by walking into the Fog of War, and two is by using your ultimate. Often in combos we use our ultimate to either reposition or refresh our passive. An example of this is EQ auto attack W, R auto attack Q. Here we perform a standard assassination combo, but we extend it with R in order to reposition, refresh our passive, and deliver extra damage. R is almost always used after a passive auto attack to maximize damage, and you can see that there's no issue integrating passive refreshes into combos. This is something that definitely needs to be done in a lot of cases, as it will give you the highest chance of killing an enemy. Onto the more advanced stuff, these are the things that more experienced Kha'Zix players do. You don't need to know these things to play the champion, but you'll probably start doing them anyway with more experience. However, the first thing I'm talking about here is something that absolutely everyone needs to take into account, which is knowing how to use your Void Assault. It's so insanely important to be able to use your ult properly, and it's what separates good Kha'Zix players from bad ones. It's a precious ability that gives Kha'Zix most of his playmaking potential, and this means we need to use it sparingly, i.e. only when we absolutely need to. Developing this habit and being less reliant on your R in fights will allow you to use it to win the fights that you actually need it for, not for the ones that are easy kills. For a general guideline, you should not be using your Void Assault for engaging when you don't need it, i.e. when you can easily walk up to the enemy without it and deal your damage successfully, failing to utilize the passive refresh, and straight up just wasting the invisibility in fights. Think about the benefit of invisibility for a second. What does it do? It stops people from seeing you. What does this mean? It means you can deny the enemy dealing damage to you. It means you can juke out enemies and fake movements. It means you can apply pressure. It means you can reposition safely and refresh your passive. Kha'Zix just doesn't work without it, so we don't waste it on low value situations. Treat this ability like a precious resource that must be preserved. Trust me, you won't regret it. Now moving on to the actual mechanics. Buffering. This is mainly a quality of life thing, but during your leap, you're able to buffer either your W or your R mid-air. This makes Kha'Zix cast the ability right before hitting the ground, which saves a bit of time. But it's not really that useful, it's just a nice little trick. QR Invisible Q. For some reason this works better with your second and third cast of R, and not your first, but it can also be done with the first as well, it'll just be a little slower. Simply use your Q into your R. This will make it so your Q goes off while invisible, which prevents melee champs from hitting you. This also works with W, but it just straight up isn't as useful. W Flash. This is exceptionally good to catch an enemy off guard with a surprising amount of burst and almost guarantees that your W will land. Simply use your W into Flash. The W's trajectory will continue where your cursor was pointed. You can use this for a clutch heal or to extend the range of your W. Q Flash. Q into Flash to reposition. This mainly serves to clutch out those close scenarios, and that's about it. R Flash over walls. This is a niche trick that works if you're going for a risky assassination. You can R and flash over a wall to close distance, remain unseen, and catch the enemy off guard. The flash particles won't be seen by the enemy from my experience, but even to this day, I don't know if I'm right about that. Regardless, hardly anyone notices it. This is particularly good if you don't want to leap for safety reasons, but can still get a reliable assassination off. Directional EQs, also known as half double jumps or fadeaways. Now, this trick is basically just a Q mid-air, however the key here is to perform the Q mid-air, but with a different leap trajectory. It's one of the most creative ways to deal damage. You can do it forward, over the enemy, backward. It gives you some flashy outplay potential, with the main benefit being that it allows you to reposition quickly, letting you save time on the ground before you leap, while still allowing you to deal your main burst damage. Getting a kill like this can allow you to hold resets to continue fighting, which also leads into our next mechanic, the iconic double jump. The double jump is the classic montage Kha'Zix mechanic that lets you double the distance of your evolved leap by jumping, resetting your jump, then jumping again. It's almost never necessary to use, but a more experienced Kha'Zix can use it to clean up unsuspecting enemies by closing massive distances. To perform it, we need to get kill participation. So long as the enemy dies during your leap, you will get another reset and be able to double jump. This means that any source of damage, whether it be from you or your team, will allow you to get the reset for your jump. The most common ones you'll be using often come from your Q, your W, your leap itself, smite, Hydra, or simply assists. So before I start going over the runes, I'd like to point out that most rune choices on Kha'Zix are purely personal preference. You can run all of these rune choices I'm about to show you, and you'll do fine. That being said, certain runes have different strengths, and before you go asking which one's better, First Strike or Dark Harvest, take a look at my explanations first. Let's start with the main two choices. First Strike is a very consistent and reliable setup for Kha'Zix that allows you to deal more damage, while also earning extra gold from dealing that damage. First Strike has an innate benefit in that it's part of the inspiration tree, which is one of the best trees in the game, as it allows you to forgo buying early boots and also have access to an extra skill point and utility. In the last row, Cosmic Insight is a very underrated and powerful rune, allowing your actives and summoner spells to come up faster, while Jack of all trades is good for a small bump in AD and haste. The secondary runes are very interchangeable, but generally you want to stick with Domination second. Eyeball Collection is a must for the AD bonus, and Treasure Hunter for the extra gold is great, but if you want more map mobility and pressure, then you can take Relentless Hunter or Ultimate Hunter instead. The next setup is the Dark Harvest rune page. Dark Harvest is a much stronger rune in the mid to late game in terms of damage, and it also resets after killing an enemy, meaning you can destroy multiple enemies in a fight with this rune. Many people ask whether First Strike or Dark Harvest is better, and though there's more to that answer than just damage, in terms of damage, Dark Harvest wins by a mile, just because of how often the rune procs, and its damage scaling up hard with each stack you get. This rune does, however, require you to get a lead early, and feels pretty weak when behind. Take Sudden Impact, Eyeball, and any of the Hunter runes. For secondary runes, you have two choices. Take either Inspiration with Magical Footwear and Jack of all trades to get some AD and free boots, or take Sorcery with Absolute Focus and Gathering Storm. These two sorcery runes will ensure that you have the highest damage out of any Kha'Zix rune setup, as Kha'Zix massively benefits from bonus AD. You might also be wondering about Electrocute. Electrocute can replace Dark Harvest if you want a build that's focused on one-shotting a single target and then getting out. I recommend running Sorcery with Electrocute to lean into more damage, since if you're not playing for max damage with Electrocute, then you may as well just run First Strike and get some gold as well, since both runes' use cases are very similar. Even then, the damage potential of Dark Harvest outshines anything Electrocute can do, so I tend to ignore this rune and run Dark Harvest instead. The third page I want to touch on is Conqueror. Conqueror is your go-to bruiser rune that allows Kha'Zix to excel in extended fights. The whole point of Conqueror is to allow Kha'Zix to either deal with heavy bruiser/fighter type compositions, or transition Kha'Zix into a bruiser build. It's by far the best rune in the game for those more scrappy type fights and builds. Take Triumph, Legend Haste, and Coup de Grace for the small runes. If you like attack speed, then Legend Alacrity and the attack speed shard are also great options. For secondary runes, the best setup tends to be Magical Footwear and Cosmic Insight. Assuming you're playing Bruiser Kha'Zix, this setup gives you access to your Ghost more often, and the free boots are just way too good to pass up. If you're running Conqueror as Assassin Kha'Zix, it should be fine to dip into Domination second if you want more damage, otherwise just stick with this Inspiration setup as it's generally the most reliable. There's two more viable choices for runes, but they're a little less practiced than the others and their viability can be questionable. The Phase Rush page is all about outmaneuvering your enemy and outplaying fights with the increased move speed. This rune lets you space better in fights and get out of the way of important CC abilities more easily, making it an extremely underrated rune that allows unmatched in-fight mobility and outplay potential. I tend to run these runes with Phase Rush, so give it a try if you want to go fast. Definitely super fun if nothing else. The last page is something I invented back in Season 9, which is Hail of Blades. This rune lets you speed up your auto attacks, which in turn allows you to get your passive auto attack off faster during combos. The 3 auto attacks are also amazing for dueling in the early game, able to out damage most other runes except Conqueror. You either love it or hate it, so try it out and see if you like it. Many people call it worthless, but over the years I've come to realize that this is secretly one of the better runes in the game for Kha'Zix, but its effects are more subtle than the others, and it's harder to use. So I strongly recommend, if you want to climb and play cast seriously, then just run the other rune pages instead. So the question remains, how do we decide what runes to run each game? Well, as I said in the beginning, most of the runes are strictly personal preference. You can run the same runes every game and do fine, but the guideline I'm going to give you is, if you want a safe, consistent option or just want to prioritize getting your items fast to snowball mid-game, then run First Strike. If you want to lean hard into more damage and scale aggressively into mid-game, then opt for a Dark Harvest page. If you want to play Bruiser Kha'Zix or deal with heavy Bruiser and Fighter comps, then take Conqueror. Phase and Hail of Blades are purely just playstyle runes, so use them whenever you want. Trust me when I say that you can run any of these and do well. What matters more is how you play during the game. And lastly, I just want to touch on spells really quick because this season more than ever, Ghost is being taken on Kha'Zix over Flash. But of course, in typical Riot fashion, they decide to nerf it and change a bunch of things before I release this guide. Though it has been nerfed and Flash still being the goated option, Ghost Kha'Zix is a very solid option as it allows Kha'Zix to engage more effectively and have unmatched mobility during teamfights. In my opinion, Ghost is more aggressive and combat oriented, so definitely give this a try and see if you like it. Also, Bruiser Kha'Zix is often seen with Ghost instead of Flash as it synergizes better with the playstyle, just something to keep in mind. Alright, time to talk about items. Kha'Zix has the benefit of being able to use a wide variety of items in the game. The possibilities for different builds are endless, and if you want to see some of that, then feel free to watch my other videos. In this guide, we'll be focusing on items that have high importance and good synergy for Kha'Zix. Let's go through the items. Starting off with a more expensive but extremely powerful item, we have Profane Hydra. This is hands down the most valuable item in the game for Kha'Zix as it gives you a lot of AD, a lot of lethality, and a big chunk of haste, but it gets even better. The active cleave provides Kha'Zix with an extra form of damage for combos, and the damage is basically equivalent to an extra ability. Not to mention, both the passive and active cleaves allow Kha'Zix to create isolation in both the jungle and minion waves. However, this item does have a relatively big weakness, which is its build path is not amazing, and it can also be quite expensive to buy. As a side note, there are a few ways to use the active in a combo. The first of which is by using it mid-air, which is good for when you're going for a low health execution. In most other cases though, you want to use the active after your initial combo when the enemy drops below 50% health, since the active does more damage to people under this health threshold. Another incredible item for Kha'Zix is Youmuu's Ghostblade. This has been a staple for Kha'Zix since the start of League and continues to be the top dog of lethality items. With high lethality, high AD, and a move speed passive and active, this gives Kha'Zix everything he needs, and the move speed in particular allows for better map rotations and better target acquisition. Not to mention, it's quite cheap as well. More often than not, this will be present in the majority of Kha'Zix assassin builds. Opportunity is quite similar to Ghostblade, however instead of the move speed active, it has a passive that gives you extra lethality and another passive that gives you lots of move speed on kills. It also gives a nice bump in move speed. I like to compare this to Youmuu's because the times in which you'd buy them are similar, but they do share different purposes. Opportunity is more focused on raw killing power, in which you get one kill with the extra lethality, and reposition with the move speed. If you find yourself needing a bit more assassination power, this is a great choice, but if you feel like your damage is enough, then just go with Youmuu's instead, since the Youmuu's passive and active are generally much more useful. Edge of Night is your go-to defensive item. It gives you a spell shield and health that keeps you safe during fights, and still gives lethality. This is a great item choice from second item onward if you want to keep yourself safe from high burst or CC. Serylda's Grudge. You'll be seeing this item a lot, as it's your main source of armor penetration. It completely counters enemies building armor, and allows Kha'Zix to deal damage to them. It still gives lethality and gives you haste as well, but the armor penetration makes it a core, must-buy option for Kha'Zix in assassin builds, and is generally bought second item onward if you need to counter armor. Eclipse is a very powerful item for Kha'Zix. It gives you a massive chunk of AD as well as haste, and has a strong % max health damage passive that gives you a shield when procced. This makes it one of the better items for dueling, and is just in general an extremely powerful item all around if you find yourself needing to duel enemies. Well, take Cycler Sword. This item has fantastic stats and an energized passive that deals physical damage on hit. Unfortunately, this reincarnation of Duskblade is sort of a jack of all trades but master of none. Though the stats on this item are great for Kha'Zix, the passive 100 physical damage doesn't scale throughout the game, so this item falls off into the mid and late game very quickly. The only use case for this item in my opinion is if you're really fed and playing against a bunch of squishies that aren't building armor. Otherwise, it's not that this item is technically bad, it's just that it's outclassed in every way by other items such as Eclipse, so just take that instead. Hubris is a risky item that gives you more AD the more kills you get. If you can get kills with this item and stack it up, the amount of AD you gain will let your abilities hit like a truck and just absolutely obliterate enemies. The snowball potential on this item is simply ridiculous, but the item itself has a big flaw in that you have to get kills and stay alive for it to be useful. Definitely a strong item, but only take it if you're confident you can do well. If you're gonna buy it as a first or second item. Muramana. This is the most reliable scaling option for Kha'Zix. If you can get through stacking the tier early game, you will be rewarded with an incredible on-hit passive that works with your abilities, a huge chunk of AD, and damage beyond your wildest dreams. Definitely a very underrated option for Kha'Zix, but it's not taken very often just because of how slow it takes to come online. Axiom Arc. This item gives you the standard AD lethality combo, but it also comes with a huge amount of haste and a passive that refunds part of your ultimate on kill. This is an incredible item if you're playing R-Evolve style builds in which you can use your R, go in for a kill, and then have your ultimate back up very fast. If you get multiple kills in a fight, then you can even ult back to back, which is just insane. Second item onward. These items are incredibly useful in almost every situation with Kha'Zix, giving him a ton of damage and fantastic utility. There are still more items which are more defensive, bruiser, or heavily utility focused, so I'm going to touch on them here. Umbral Glaive. This is a good first item option for Kha'Zix that is focused on vision control. It's cheap and gives decent stats, but for the most part, I don't think it's worth taking unless you're running the Zombie Ward rune with it and playing a utility focused playstyle that controls vision. It's definitely good, but there's better options early on. Serpent's Fang. Built in order to counter heavy shielding. I just like the whole concept of this item and believe that champs other than Kha'Zix should carry this utility, but it can be pretty good with more supportive W-Evolve builds in order to counter shields. Chempunk Chainsword. It's the same premise as Serpent's Fang, except it works to counter healing. Death Stance. Mostly taken to keep yourself alive in fights and counter AD compositions. Pretty good option if you play more defensively. Maw of Malmortius. Same premise as Death Stance, except against AP. Frozen Heart. This item is really disgusting against auto attackers, so if you want to play more defensive and ruin auto attackers' days, then by all means take this fourth item onward. Spirit Visage. Similar concept to Frozen Heart, but against AP, and it can also be taken in general if you just want to increase your healing and sustain. Guardian Angel. Very solid defensive option if you feel like not dying is important or you can't guarantee your safety during a fight. Usually taken last. Black Cleaver. Mostly for bruiser builds now, as it allows Kha'Zix to shred armor from enemies and gives him a lot more bulk as well. Great if you want to deal with bruises or be a bruiser. Spear of Shojin. Another bruiser item option. Hands down the best item in the game for Bruiser Conqueror Kha'Zix, as it gives you ability haste, bulk, and a passive that enhances ability damage. Wonderful item. Sundered Sky. Bruiser type item that helps you survive in fights and gives you a nice crit attack that deals pretty reasonable damage. Now these are the items that you shouldn't buy because they're just straight up bad. You know what's coming. The Collector. This is not made for assassins. It's made for lethality 80 carries. Don't buy this garbage item. Please don't. I'm begging you at this point. It's completely garbage unless you're running a for fun crit build. The same goes for all the other crit items. There is no reason to be running these unless you want to play a for fun crit build. Standard lethality Kha'Zix will always be more effective even if the damage from crit is good. Alright, that's it. I think that's all the items. As you can see, there are an insane amount of items that you can run on Kha'Zix. Each of them have their own strengths, and it really just depends what you need during the game, and also a bit of personal preference. Now moving on to builds, I'll be touching on both Assassin and Bruiser Kha'Zix. For your first item, there's a lot you can take, but the two most common first items include Youmuu's Ghostblade and Profane Hydra. Ghostblade for increased map tempo, or Profane for this super valuable active helping with overall damage and clear speeds. After following up with your boots, your third purchase should be a utility lethality item depending on what you need. If you bought Youmuu's first, you'll be lacking some haste, so definitely consider a haste heavy item, such as Axiom or Profane in this case. For your fourth item, if the enemy is building armor, then you'll want to go into Sorodas. If you don't need it yet, then another lethality item works. Edge of Night in particular is really good here. For your fifth item, prioritize Edge of Night if you didn't buy it already, otherwise another utility lethality item is good here. If you want to lean into more damage or deal with beefier enemies, Eclipse is a fantastic flexible damage option and is very easy to proc. Your last item is the most flexible and is mostly situational. You can run more lethality, more utility, or just goes defensive. It's the perfect time to experiment and see what you like or what you need. If you haven't got Profane yet, you definitely want to pick it up. Otherwise, this is definitely an item slot that you can flex depending on what you need. Now for Bruiser Kha'Zix, you'll want to start off with Spear of Shojin, followed up with your boots into either Black Cleaver for armor pen, or Sundered Sky for skirmishing and a bit of survivability. At any point, Eclipse is a good choice if you want some more burst in your build. After that, run what you didn't take before, or build defensive options if you feel the need to. The same thing applies to the fifth item, and for the last item, it's situational depending on what you need. It can be defensive, can be more damage, it's really up to you. Here are some example builds to try out in case you want some consistently high performing builds to follow. I still strongly recommend learning what each item is good for and building situationally, but this will get you started. This is probably the most important section of the guide, and I guarantee you, if you're already struggling on this champion, so long as you follow what I'm about to tell you in this section, your performance on Kha'Zix will improve drastically. Fundamentals are essential to everything you do in League, and Kha'Zix is no exception. Think of these as the set of rules that you need to be following in order to find consistent success on the champion. I can't tell you how many times people ignore the basics, then go on to ask, what am I doing wrong? They're usually focused more on the actual build of the character, thinking a different item or different evolution will save them. Nope. The way to succeed in League is to learn what makes your champion good and play to their strengths. The first thing you absolutely need to do on Kha'Zix is to farm a lot and prioritize yourself. Kha'Zix by nature is a champ that is expensive to play, and the situations in which he is actually useful are heavily limited by team compositions and matchups. So how do we play around this? We need to keep up with our gold and experience income, so that when the time comes to fight and a situation looks promising for us, we can capitalize off of that and grow our lead and snowball the game. This is why if you watch me, you know that I full clear almost every single game to get to level 4, since a Kha'Zix behind in levels is quite weak. Do whatever it takes to get that early lead as Kha'Zix, even if it means leaving your team for dead or taking their minions in some cases. There's no sugarcoating it. If you're playing an expensive, snowball-reliant assassin, you need to get fed in order to succeed. Of course, it's important to help your team, but if you want to be the one that hard carries your team and wins games consistently, you need to not care about your team so much and be selfish. They might hate you for not ganking or playing around them and start flaming you, but does it really matter when at the end of the day, you're the one who's going to be destroying that Nexus? Not really. So, farm a lot, always take your camps, and get the gold you need to become strong. The next fundamental is a more universal one, but with Kha'Zix it applies even more so because he's a very unforgiving champion. Stop dying. All of that time that you spend being dead is time wasted that could be spent on farming, taking objectives, and making yourself stronger. It's really that simple. Odds are, if you're struggling with this character, one of the main mistakes you're making is that you're dying too much or dying in important situations. For a guideline, aim to die no more than 4 times per game. Now you're obviously going to go over this, hell I do it a lot of the time, but the point here is to mitigate the amount of bad decisions you make by keeping your deaths to a minimum. That being said, don't be excessively passive and don't go for any plays at all just because you don't want to die. That doesn't help anyone. Make sure to test your limits, but keep in mind situations where you could die. If there's a high chance you die from making a play, then don't take it. It's not worth it. You can't play the game if you're grey screened. The last fundamental is called pressure. So, you're farming well, you're not dying. Now how do you actually transfer this lead into a win? The answer is pressure. Pressure is defined as the continuous physical force exerted on or against an object by something in contact with it. Relating this to League, you need to be able to constantly find moments where you put aside your farm in favor of gaining a lead over the enemy. We can do this by taking towers, neutral objectives, gaining vision, as well as threatening or killing enemies. Basically anything outside of farming your jungle safely exerts pressure on the enemy team. The most obvious way to do this as an assassin is to pick off the enemy one by one safely. This translates into more objectives, and repeating this process while focusing on objectives will net you a win eventually. Now this is often something that lower elo players overlook. Even though they have a bunch of kills and farm a lot, they still lose the game because they don't destroy the Nexus. Create pressure on the map and use the kills that you get as opportunities to take down objectives and win the game. It's super simple when you say it out loud, right? I know it's much harder in game, but do your best. So to summarize, your priorities as Kha'Zix are to 1. Don't die, 2. Farm the entire map and get your early lead, 3. Use that lead to pressure the map, take objectives, and eventually win the game. Kha'Zix in the jungle is pretty solid. He has a slightly above average clear speed, and good optimization of your jungle clearing is essential to getting early leads. For the sake of simplicity, you only want to go for either one of 2 clears during a game. The first clear is a full clear, from blue or red all the way over to the other side. This will give you level 4, and the difference between level 3 and 4 Kha'Zix is enormous. You'll have a strong foundation for the early game, and be able to fight most champs early. This is a safe early option if you think that a good gank exists on the side lanes, or if you think the jungler will go for a late gank after they're clear, in which you'd be able to counter it. The second clear is a 3 camp clear, which you can do multiple ways, but the most common one at the moment is Raptors Krugs Red. This lets you clear one side of the map, get red buff, and hit level 3 so that you can path towards the lane or invade for an early kill. This is only really good on Kha'Zix if there's an aggressive, volatile lane, or if you have a good CC setup from your laners to lock down the enemy during the gank. However, even if there's no such opportunity, Raptor Start is extremely flexible. Not only does it give you early game options with red buff, but it also leads into a very efficient full clear where you take your blue buff side camps, crab, then rotate back to your Raptors and Krugs and clear them again as they respawn. This will get you 1 tick off of level 5, and you'll hit level 5 off of any other source of XP before or after this clear. For demonstration purposes, we'll be going over a full clear. This will show the most efficient way to clear your camps on Kha'Zix. Make sure to follow along to learn the most optimal way. For blue buff, you just want to smack it down and smite it if you aren't getting a leash. The key here is to drag it over to the Gromp to save yourself some walking time. For Gromp, it's pretty much the same thing, just smack it down, weave in your auto attacks between your Qs, and pull the Gromp over towards Wolves before it dies. For Wolves, you want to focus down the big one and hit both of the small wolves once with an auto attack. Make sure to W all of them, the small wolves will die, and drag the isolated big wolf over to the other side of the jungle. For Raptors, jump onto all of them, and make sure to hit all of them with your W. Focus the big one down, drag them backward a little bit if you can, and finish them all off with a second W. For the second buff, simply drag the buff into the bush, and here you want to hold your leap so that you can easily access the Krugs after the buff and save yourself some time. For Krugs, focus the big one and smite it. Yes, smiting the big one is faster than focusing the small one. You want to make sure both Krugs die at around the same time, then W to finish off all the mini Krugs at the same time to finish the clear. After you finish, you have 3 options, which is either to go for a gank, take Scuttle Crab, or recall and buy items. Now for the 3 camp Raptor start / extended clear, the way you clear the camps is pretty much the same, but of course there'll be some changes. I'll let the clear play out with some explanations. Since you're starting Raptors, you'll start W and focus the big one while the small ones die to the Ws. You then want to walk past your red and shoot out a W over the wall to bring the Krugs closer. Doing so will isolate the small one, so Q it and focus the big one down and finish as per usual. If you don't want a W over the wall, then don't worry, you don't have to. Take your red afterwards, and now you've got options. This is the part where you can choose to gank a lane, invade, or continue with your clear. For this demonstration, we'll be continuing the clear just to show you what it's like. Crossing over to the blue buff side, we want to take Wolves and Gromp. Same as usual, except for Wolves, we just jump on them and we don't have to hit the small ones at all. It's important to take Gromp over blue buff first because that means Gromp will spawn right after Wolves, which allows us to take them off cooldown if we choose to keep clearing. This is what is known as sequencing camps. After we finish our clear, we're again left with a lot of options, but if we wanted to finish this sequence of events, we would walk back up, see if we can take the second crab if it's up, then take Raptors and Krugs again, recalling afterwards. As you can see, I have enough gold to buy a major component, and I'm also on the cusp of hitting level 5. For Kha'Zix, this sort of path can be very strict, in that you won't have time to do much else, but it's definitely a very efficient path if you plan on just clearing with no aggressive options for the first clear. So I've already gone over the fundamentals, and those will help you throughout all stages of the game. However, this section will mostly focus on guidelines as to what you should be ideally playing for in the early, mid, and late game. Starting with the most important stage of the game, the early game is the time when you as a Kha'Zix need to farm up heavily and focus on getting to level 6 as fast as possible. If you're able to go for ganks, definitely take them, as you should get at least a couple kills early on in order to start snowballing. Otherwise, you mostly want to be focusing on heavy full clearing as you progress to level 6. Unless there's a good chance, forget about invading. Focus mostly on your own jungle and the early objectives. Now before level 6, you're going to be faced with a choice as to whether to contest the newly added Void Grubs and also Dragon. These two objectives should be your main focus early game, especially the Void Grubs as they give good experience, get you closer to level 6 and also give a very useful buff. In order to prepare for a potential grub fight, aim to reach level 5 and get at least a serrated Dirk. This setup should be enough to win most fights in the river early on, but use your best judgment and take a look at your lanes to see if they're able to help. Even getting one grub is not too bad, and afterwards keep farming, gank if you can, and progress towards level 6. If the dragon is up for grabs and no one's around, or you can contest for it, then go for it. Otherwise, the grubs and level 6 take priority. Once you actually hit level 6, your ganks and fighting potential become a lot stronger. Look to pick advantageous fights with your Void Assault and secure kills. Evolving Q will help you with the neutrals and dueling, whilst R-Evolve will help you gank lanes better, and it's also pretty good for dueling as well. Generally, when your ult is on cooldown, you should be using that time to farm up and wait for it to come back up. Keep farming, take the grubs and dragons, and get kills where you can. When Herald comes up, look to take that as well. Towards the mid game, do not forget about your farm. This is the time where a lot of junglers think they can stop farming and just go fight, fight, fight. This is wrong. Farming is the best way to maintain your XP gains at base level during this time. Your goal is mostly the same as in the early game, which is to farm, get kills, then translate this into taking towers and neutral objectives. Do not take 1-for-1 trades during this time, and do your absolute best not to die, since your importance as a jungler increases with the Baron and Dragon being key contest areas. Once you hit level 11, you need to decide if you want to take W evolve or not. If you're behind and don't have much killing power, evolve it. During the late game where you likely don't need to farm anymore, 100% of your focus should be on not dying. Dying late game is a surefire way to throw and lose the game. Look for safe, reliable kills so that you can push more objectives and close out the game. Ultimately, the fundamentals I talked about will carry you through to the end of the game. Farm, 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 stay alive, pressure, pressure, pressure the map. Your job is to be a persistent threat that the enemy can't afford to ignore. Contrary to what many people think, Kha'Zix can be an excellent teamfighter if played right. I usually recommend 2 things that are absolutely essential to succeeding as Kha'Zix in a small skirmish or teamfight. The first and most important is patience. You need to know when to go in and when to stay put. Going in preemptively is the worst thing you can do on this champion, since it only takes a tiny bit of damage or CC to completely shut you down. The best rule I can give you is to not engage into hard CC range, since it spells certain doom for you. You should be taking into account the cooldowns of such abilities, for example, Nautilus ulti or Lulu polymorph. When it comes to leaping, never ever get greedy with your leap, only jump if it's safe to do so, and hold that leap as much as you can. Same with the ultimate, ideally save it until you need it to engage or reposition mid-fight. Keep in mind that not all fights are ideal for Kha'Zix, so if you feel like you can't find an opening, don't hesitate to leave and do something else on the map like push a lane or take a tower. The second tip is to stay hidden. Kha'Zix is a very predictable champion when you can see him. Using Leap or Void Assault while the enemy can see you makes it extremely obvious what you're going to do. To counteract this, we need to stay hidden up until the point we start fighting. This gives us the element of surprise, and often the enemy team won't adjust to your positioning because they can't see you, which opens up good kill opportunities. Try to stay inside bushes and use sweeper lens to clear out wards. The best position for you to be in is behind the enemy for a flank, or inside a bush, or both. Just do your absolute best to stay hidden as much as you can. This will also encourage better positioning on your part. The difference between a visible Kha'Zix and an unseen one is night and day. So as an added bonus clip, I'm going to show you a teamfighting situation where I can't really hide that well because of enemy vision, but we're going to find a way to use this to our advantage and still have an impact on the teamfight. So as you can see, there's a fight breaking out in the mid lane, and this bush is the perfect position for me to be in for a reliable R-Evo engage onto the enemy. Assuming this isn't warded, all I need to do is wait in this bush and engage at the right time once they split or burn cooldowns. However, this bush is in fact warded. I have no sweeper's lens up and the enemy can see me, so what do I do here? Well, we can actually use their vision to our advantage. Because I'm in such a threatening position for them, I can hold this spot and apply pressure to the fight by making them think that I want to engage from this spot. I'm essentially baiting them into focusing on me, whilst my team has a bit of breathing room to deal damage during the fight. So as you can see, I've caught the Lucian's attention, and though he does chunk me a little bit, I'm able to leap out and distract them for a bit. This gives my team a bit of breathing room as they try and walk up, but quickly get jumped on as the enemy team's attention shifts to the fight. Thankfully, I didn't take too much damage, so I can still threaten them here again, so all I need to do is walk up yet again and make my presence known once more. So I walk back, but this time I use my R. I was trying to go for an engage here, but it's far too dangerous to fully commit to one here. So in this case, I'm simply testing the waters to see if there's a good chance I can find something here. Unfortunately, there's not, so I don't overcommit. If I were to appear out of stealth right now, I would get destroyed by their whole team who are watching for me. I still would technically accomplish my job, but ideally we don't want to die. So the best decision here is to back off yet again. At this point, this is pretty much my job fulfilled. I've successfully distracted the enemy and got them off my team, and now my team can look for the next move. So the Lucian commits in an attempt to chunk me down, but I Void Assault and yet again take his attention away from my Yasuo, who would have died if Lucian weren't focused on me. Having done my job, the fight turning in our favor with Azir dead and Mega Gnar ulti coming up, I find my chance to finally engage on the isolated Nami, and that's my contribution to the fight done. We win it, I do die though, but we win the game shortly after. Hopefully this can show you that as an assassin, there's multiple ways of contributing to a fight, aside from just killing stuff. In Kha'Zix's case, you have to pick and choose your fights very carefully, and so threatening, pressuring, and distracting, especially with W evolve if you have it, can lead to some great results. And that's all for this guide. I've covered everything that you need to know in order to play Kha'Zix effectively. So long as you follow what's in this guide, you follow the fundamentals and keep testing your limits with the champ, it's only a matter of time until you find success with Kha'Zix. Remember, this champ is very flexible, so if you don't like a certain build, feel free to try out a different one. If you're unsure how to put everything together in an actual game, I'm always posting videos about different Kha'Zix builds, so take a look at my other videos if you want to learn how to pilot Kha'Zix in-game. I hope you enjoyed and maybe learned something from this guide. It encompasses almost 12 years of Kha'Zix experience, and it's my pleasure to show you it. Make sure to like the video, and if you have any questions, feel free to drop a comment below and I'll do my best to answer it. If you want to watch my games live and talk to me live, check out my Twitch at twitch.tv/TinjusX1 with a link in the description. Consider subscribing if you're new to Kha'Zix and just want to see more of him as well. Thank you very much for watching this guide. My name is Tinjus, and good luck with Kha'Zix.